It is the winter of 1943, somewhere in the English countryside, inside a nondescript building surrounded by barbed wire and frozen mud. A German prisoner of war sits across from a British interrogation officer. He is not being tortured. He is not being threatened. He is simply being asked one question. What was it like fighting the British? And what this man says, what hundreds of men just like him would say across dozens of camps across every theater of the war, would be almost word for word identical, not because they were coached, not because they were afraid, but because they had all seen the same thing. What they saw changed how military historians understand the Second World War forever. Stick around because, by the end of this video, you will understand why German soldiers feared the British more than any other enemy they faced. From September 1939 to May 1945, British and German forces clashed on an almost unimaginable scale. In the frozen waters of the North Atlantic, German submarine commanders hunted British convoys in the dark. From the burning sands of North Africa to the hedgerows of Normandy, the British military fought everywhere at once. The army had been evacuated from Dunkirk, saved but stripped of most of its equipment. Any rational assessment of British military power in June 1940 would have suggested that the country was in no position to continue fighting. And yet they did. The Germans expected an easy victory. What they found instead was something they could not explain, something that would haunt them long after the war ended. During the war, the British ran several major prisoner interrogation facilities. The most famous was the Combined Services Detailed Interrogation Center, known as CSDIC, which operated out of Trent Park, a grand country house in North London. But this was no ordinary interrogation center. It was a sophisticated intelligence operation where German prisoners were held in comfortable conditions, and their conversations were secretly recorded. The prisoners believed they were speaking freely. They did not know that every word they said was being listened to by British intelligence officers. Between 1939 and 1945, more than 10,000 German and 500 Italian prisoners passed through Trent Park and its two related listening centers. The operation was codenamed Operation Eavesdrop. What the listeners heard would shock them to their core. German soldiers consistently described the British as fair. When they took prisoners, they did not shoot them. When they searched a man, they did not take his personal belongings beyond what was militarily necessary. One German non-commissioned officer captured near Tobruk in 1942 told his interrogating officer, "You treat us better than I expected, better than some of our own officers treat enlisted men." This was not what they expected. They expected hatred. They expected contempt. Instead, they reported being treated with a kind of professional respect that they found almost incomprehensible. Another German soldier remarked, "Your sailors treated us as they would treat their own men." This treatment was in stark contrast to the brutality that German soldiers had witnessed and committed on other fronts. The contrast was so striking that it left a permanent impression on every German prisoner who experienced it. But the respect went beyond mere treatment. German prisoners also spoke in awe of British military capabilities. British field artillery doctrine was built around a concept called the regimental fire plan, a methodical, coordinated approach to delivering mass firepower at precisely the right moment. And it worked. One German artillery officer told his British interrogator in 1943, "Your gunners do not waste a round, they wait. And then they are everywhere at once." The British supply system was, in the assessment of their own prisoners, building a war-winning advantage, one supply truck at a time. German soldiers could not understand how the British kept their forces fed, armed, and moving across vast distances. The Spitfire earned universal admiration. One captured Messerschmitt pilot described it as a machine that seems designed to embarrass everything around it. Even in flight, he said it was beautiful, but the decisive factor was the pilots. Not their skill in the narrow technical sense. The decisive factor was something harder to quantify. The Royal Air Force pilots flew as if the stakes were personal. The Luftwaffe flew against Britain with every expectation of victory. Hermann Göring promised Hitler that his Air Force would destroy the Royal Air Force in 4 weeks. Instead, every time German bombers crossed the Channel, there were the Spitfires and the Hurricanes, still there, still climbing, still fighting. German soldiers also observed something else about the British character that they could not understand. London civilians went to work the next morning, walking past rubble with calm, determined expressions. Farmers seemed more irritated about the inconvenience than frightened. The British people did not break. They did not surrender. They simply carried on. For German soldiers who came from a nation that worshipped military strength and ideological purity, this quiet resilience was baffling. They could not understand a people who refused to be afraid. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy. The British army that landed on gold and sword beaches was not the same institution that had been evacuated from Dunkirk in 1940. It had learned. It had adapted. One German panzer commander told his interrogator, "Fighting the British is like fighting a machine. You stop one part and another part takes over. The artillery never sleeps. The aircraft never sleep." Montgomery's approach, methodical, deliberate, resource-intensive, frustrated his American allies. But German prisoners who experienced these attacks from the receiving end described them in consistent terms. The British were overwhelming in their firepower. The Americans attack like a hammer. One German officer said, "The British attack like a glacier. You can dodge the hammer. You cannot dodge the glacier." For German submarine crews, the enemy was primarily the Royal Navy. And for a period between 1940 and 1942, those submarine crews were extraordinarily successful. The tide turned in 1943 with the introduction of new escort carriers, improved radar, better depth charges, and the breaking of the Enigma naval codes. German sailors described the Royal Navy with a mixture of fear and respect. "We changed our codes. We changed our tactics. We changed our frequencies, and every time within weeks they found us again," one submarine commander admitted. "We began to believe they could hear us thinking." Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945. The war in Europe was over, and in the years and decades that followed, a picture emerged that confirmed what the wartime interrogations had already suggested. German veterans, speaking freely in post-war interviews, said remarkably similar things to what their imprisoned comrades had said in the interrogation rooms decades before. They had not stopped because they were not the stopping kind in the end. That is what every German prisoner said, not in so many words, but in every word they said they were not the stopping kind. The British were a machine, a glacier, an unstoppable force, not because they were superhuman, but because they refused to quit, and that is a lesson worth remembering. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and let us know in the comments. What do you think made the British so hard to defeat?